there on stage and have their senior vice presidents. And they talk about what's going on during the week at Google in world issues. And anybody can ask questions. People from India can submit questions, and they can hear them broadcast live or rebroadcast. People can get up to a mic. Anyway, so last year we had a lot of this like crisis with advertising. People are starting to become more aware they can identify online, right? And Google plays a big hand in this. Anyway, so Nikesh Arora, who is basically the head of finance at Google and the head of ad sales, got up and so Google's a place that's known to hire people specifically because they have humanities backgrounds in addition to engineering and stuff like this. And so first of all, he gets up on stage and he says, well, I want to ask you guys a question before we get into this kind of heated debate about whether it's ethical to trap people by advertising. And he says, does anybody have a problem with making money? And so there's that silence in the room. And I raised my hand. And I said, well, how are we making the money? And I got a really good response from him, actually. He said, thank you for asking the question. It's a really important one. And the reason I'm telling this story is because there is, as Stefan was saying, we need to talk about how we manage our optics. There are opportunities for us to step in and engage in places we would not normally think of being opportunities. And certainly maybe Google's more receptive to that, or but there are other players out there that are living in this world where, again, in the realm of like advertising, they are engaged in the conversation of commodification. But they are receptive because they are coming up against the sort of ethical and humanistic problems that we deal with every day in this field. So,
in very practical ways.
Right.
I used to have a philosopher around.
One of the things that's coming up is a kind of contradiction that we've been talking about the humanities is separate from a space that's separate from a reflective space, a place where we can think. And yet a lot of the compelling arguments we're hearing are emerging about the role of the humanities as one of engagement. Your arguments are very compelling. And I think we need to make a decision about whether we do want to engage. And if we do want to engage, to Stefan's point, maybe we need to describe what we're doing a little bit differently. Maybe calling it humanities is something that we understand amongst ourselves, but we're creating meaning, we're questioning value, we are doing things that are completely applicable and in sync and complementary to our colleagues in the different fields. And actually, I would argue that science is going through a huge crisis at the moment itself. I think the place of basic science at the moment is a very difficult place. And they are being forced to partner with industry to be very applied and practical. And so it would be a very interesting exercise, too, to watch how they're adjusting to that in simple ways. And one of the ways they're doing that is by articulating their value and engagement.
I just want to I think we also want to be careful about our biases against scientists. That, I think we sometimes tend to be condescending about scientists, that scientists should be humanists, but we rarely think about how in the proliferation of values and perspectives that we have on the world, scientific perspectives on the world can be very useful. So, last thing, if you want to have a conversation starter, there's I am for humanities t-shirts here, first come, first served. I'm going to leave them there and prefer the box be empty.
Okay.
That's right.
Yes, so please, it's a chance to get a new wardrobe.
I have a question that's going on. Just the term transferable is a question, really. Because I hear it a lot, the fact that my degree in drama or English lit is very transferable, so good for you. And that kind of, I find it really icky, and I don't like it, because what I'm doing is pretty specific and pretty intense and difficult, but as you say, it's hard. And I enjoy it a lot, but hearing people say that humanities are very transferable skills kind of takes away from them, in my opinion, and takes away from me defining, like, what you were saying, what is it exactly that we're doing in humanities, and what are we developing, and if we're just developing transferable skills for the sake of transferable skills to be able to do something else, that's not interesting. That's not the point of why I'm studying humanities. And that's sort of a question I would to ask everyone in the city.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think that we have to look kind of at the core of what we're doing as an investment in being people. And I really agree with your point about how the nation state doesn't really value, doesn't really put that kind of value into creating citizens anymore. It's very corporatized. And back to science, I think that both the sciences, in terms of like the pure sciences, when we get to like the core of what we're trying to do, it's kind of like search for truth, right? It's like search for like, that's not valuable either, really, in the economy. They're also facing the same crisis that we are, because we're searching maybe for meaning. Sorry, I'm just going to use these like meaning, feeling, whatever. But we're searching for something that's very pure, something that's not really articulable in an economic, transferable way. And so are they in this like rational, logical, but pure truth sort of way. I think the issue is not so much science versus humanities, but it's much more the academy or knowledge versus kind of like the commodification of individuals and citizens and the students, each of these like tools for the economy. And it's kind of these pre-professional degrees which make it very hard for people to become full people, full citizens, before they become sorted as like tools in this commodification of talent. And I think we have to look kind of at how we can project our value into, and also with sciences too, how we can all kind of project our value as more than just being an economic, individualistic supply, but also sort of how we are providing more to society at large. And it's very hard to do in this kind of political, social political environment.
Yeah, I do think it's important to distinguish between people that enter into the humanities with the intention of being academics and remaining in academia, and people who enter into the humanities with the intention of then going on to do something else. And you brought this up earlier. Because obviously in the sense of remaining in academia, the idea of your skills being transferable is vague. You want to think that the content that you're learning and the materials you're dealing with are going to be useful to you. But I think the reality is that if you're leaving academia and you're intending to work in a job in some other field, then what you have to take away from your education is not the content, but the way of learning. So I think it really depends who your audience is in this case. If we're talking about valuing humanities within the academy, it's going to be a very different discussion than valuing humanities in the larger economy.
I just wanted to say I don't think it's much of a hard issue to justify academia and humanities to the plebeian, because you just need to use very simple language. If the common accusation that humanities is useless, English is useless to study, philosophy is useless, it makes a funny party joke, but the logical flaw in that kind of question is very easily addressed by saying what is useful. What makes something useful? In any scientific fruit that has served any use, it's called so because it meets one of our needs, health and happiness. You know, it's always an emotional issue because we grasp life through our own mental realities. And it's like that for English, so why can't it be valuable in and of itself? The discussion is, it's got an economic, it's dominated by the money question, which I think is a little bit misguided, because writing carefully, reading carefully, and critical thinking, that's always going to be useful. When my grandfather was a biology student before he became an English professor, his bio professor begged him to stay in biology because he could write well. He could take an idea and set it out clearly. And that is a transferable skill in addition to being valuable in and of itself, because thinking clearly is always going to be valuable.
Sean and then Catherine.
It seems to me that the question is seldom genuinely about the usefulness or the value of humanities. Most of the time that I have been joked at for doing a useless study, the tacit subtext has been, well, of course I would love to do what you're doing, but I can't because of the material concerns. Yeah, so the joke of what you do is useless is often a way of people saying how jealous they are of my life, so I always take it as a great compliment. but it seems to me that the communication is not a question so much of value in a pure sense, but of making those values accessible. And sorry, the young woman who spoke last, what's her name? Lucy, sorry. I thought what you were saying about it being out of reach for most people is huge. I had a number of students this last term who took the Milton course and had to do so at great risk because they were going into medical school, and so to take an English course, something outside of their discipline, was something that hurt them because they could only get a B+ in the course. And the professionalization of degree programs made that kind of liberal arts style education something that they didn't feel free to do, and it took quite a bit of bravery for them to try and do that. So I seldom meet people who don't see the value in what I study, but who see it as out of reach seems to be a more pressing concern in my experience. So yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you, Lucy, on bringing that up, and I'm not sure how to fix that, though.
I guess that brings me back to when I was using Wilde's quote and the idea that it's a luxury.
Yeah.
And it's a luxury that people can't afford. It's a luxury in a time of limited resources where you have to make sort of hard choices of distribution of support. Then making the argument for the humanities gets harder.
I'm not sure how to articulate this, but I'm minoring in biology. And throughout biology courses, you have this sustained acknowledgement of the value of transferable skills, such as communication. I took Biology 201 last year, which is terrible, but at the end of the course, the last lecture, Professor Brohard said, hey, everybody should take an English course because writing is so useful, and you have so much writing to do in science, right? That's the main way that scientists communicate, is writing papers and trying to get them published. I'm currently in a course, I'm in Biology 307 right now, which is mainly studying scientific papers and how to properly write a scientific report. So they do acknowledge the value of the humanities, but then the courses that are available to undergraduates in science are, art of listening, popular music before 1945, like useless courses. sorry. To all the people who like art of listening. They're courses that don't teach you the deeper and more culturally valuable aspects of the humanities. Right. They teach you, the humanities are this easy, fun course that you can take on the side, not really do much, but you'll get an A, so it'll be great. I have a friend in biology who I was actually discussing the Milton course I took last semester with him, and he expressed that he would really like to take a creative writing class, but there was really nothing that he could take, and that he thinks that creative writing would be fun. And the issue is, English is not just creative writing. English is studying our cultural history, and so is much of the humanities. So is history. So is the study of political science or philosophy. It's studying our culture and appreciating what generations before us have contributed to our culture.
This is wonderful. I have to speak. I think that what I've heard in this remark is something that really concerns me, and I want to speak to it. It seems to me that there's an almost endless fragmentation of what we call the humanities. I don't think we really know what we're referring to when we use that label. It contains so much. It's a swarm, which is ever expanding, and the problem is that there's no way of measuring what's better and what's worse, and we're reluctant to even suggest that that's a possibility. If I could observe that up until probably the Second World War, for probably 700 years, the humanities was a rigorously structured studium. If you go back to the medieval universities with the trivium and the quadrivium, there was an order to the way in which you pursued your studies, and that everything built upon what you had done previously, and there was a goal in view. And some of the philosophical theories of the 19th and 20th centuries suggested to us that is probably impossible. We can't suppose that there was such a goal. But then, in the early modern university, you have literati humaniores, which required that there would be a certain set of texts that every well-educated person ought to know. And it's only, you might say, in the last 2 generations that that's gone. Mm-hmm. And we should ask ourselves, why did those people for such a long time think that the humanities was an ordered, disciplined inquiry, and why don't we think that? Because in some sense, I think they are, we're onto something and we've forgotten something. And so I think we really have to go right back to the beginning to ask this very difficult question, the what is question, this question that we find in the dialogues of Plato. It's the hardest question, but I don't think we have an answer to what is the humanities. Does it include basket weaving? I mean, there are some places where it probably does. And the thing is, I really am persuaded when I go into my classroom and I refer to things that, who's Homer? What's the Bible? I mean, you almost get questions like that. Now, that's a gross exaggeration, but it's verging on that. And so I think that I probably sound like a crank when I get going on this, but in any kind of common culture, we've got to have a common set of books, and we have to introduce students into an ancient conversation that goes back at least 2,500 years. And if they don't read Homer before they leave McGill, this is a very sad thing.
I mean, this is obviously one of the problems that's sort of related to, I think, the difficulty people have these days in articulating the value of humanities because of this agreement what humanities should be. But I think we have to put your comment in the context of Sue's comment also of how humanities have developed in the 20th century. And also be realistic about our context. The global context is not the same. I mean, I'm all for going back to the Renaissance. As far as I'm concerned, everything after 1901 is a disaster. But we have to face that, that it's happened. We're living
I think that's after 1901 that they added English to the curriculum of University of
No, actually, yes, at Oxford, Oxford was late, but it was obviously earlier at McGill, which I find really fascinating, because the English is very, very late as part of the curriculum. But I think that is a very good point of something that is going to have to come up in other forms. I saw James, you had your hand up.
I think part of the problem with this idea of a common culture is that when these people were reading the canon, only 10% of the population was literate. So obviously, the people who were educated would have been reading them. Now it seems to be some sort of new ideological problem. But in any case, the problem is ideological. The enemy is the ideology, not profession of any sort. So,
Chloe, did you have?
I think also what is coming up in this discussion is the fact that nowadays we do have this greater accessibility to lots of information. Yes. And I think one of the things that we have to consider why are we studying humanities is why are we training our minds within university to approach these studies when, especially nowadays, thanks to the internet, if I have a question about Homer, I can Google him, find out his Wikipedia page, and proceed to read and possibly even edit and say something like Homer is cool, and then just kind of return it later and see if anyone has changed it or added. And I think that's something that we should consider as this discussion develops over the course of the next couple of weeks, is what is the value of training specifically for the humanities when so many other disciplines within arts and within university in general tend to see it as something as maybe more of a hobby, something you can do outside of the classroom environment?
Or I think one of the things you're also raising is that, the question of humanities education is available in other forms elsewhere. You have Wikipedia as a form of education. That there are other forms of information. Ellen, would you have a comment on this? Elizabeth?
I was actually going to sort of add to your point about sort of the idea of an established canon, because one of the things, I'm an English major, so I had to take a poetics last semester, and one of the things that I complained bitterly about to my poetics professor was that we studied almost exclusively white male poetry and sort of poetry done by white males, and sort of, I know stuff after 1901 was bad, but at least after 1901, women started entering the canon, and also people of color, and sort of the globalization of the sort of like literature means that it's become very hard to sort of say these 50 books are great works and these are the only ones we should study, and that's why I actually really love studying English at McGill, because last year I took a post-colonial class and I could really get in dialogue with these, with a anthropologist in Egypt talking about his experiences And that was a really cool experience. And so I think that's sort of an important core part of the humanities, is that sort of globalized idea.
That certainly is the context, yeah?
Yeah, I was going to add on to, but this came up again now. Something that is very special about the English department at McGill is that at the time when most English departments across North America and the world were losing this disciplinary coherence, this English department managed at great difficulty to nonetheless maintain the kind of historical approach that is necessary to create a conversation that grows, without, however, excluding all the other wonderful exuberance that is not just on the margins, but part of that conversation. That's very hard to do, and literature department, well, if they manage to exist as such, literature departments are going to be hard pressed to create that kind of coherence in the future, because they've gone and thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and sometimes it's not so easy to give birth to that baby again. So I think that's what I've worked in so many different universities, in many countries, and I think it's such a wonderful thing that we manage nonetheless to preserve a historical approach and some coherence.
Well, I think, Jonathan?
Oh, well, I would just want to say the Wikipedia comments is the question is right there before us, and it needs to be answered, and we're there to answer it, which is this. There is a ex-governor's candidate in Virginia. I read the story just yesterday. I thought it was fascinating. So everyone sort of heard about Chris Christie in New Jersey is having all these problems with the scandal, and so this ex-Republican governor candidate in Virginia said, I think Chris Christie should step down from the American Republican Governors Association. Not because he thinks that Chris Christie is guilty of a crime, but because, quote, perception is reality. And wow. Came out and said it, and we have the internet today, and we have all this information, but no one knows what to do with it, and it's incumbent upon us to be there to answer that for the people who have that question.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to say a few things. First, in response to the comment from the corner of talking about the value of this essential location in opposition to the internet. And if I understood your comment correctly, what I think is important about what you said is that there shouldn't really be a distinction anymore. Universities need to start using the internet well. They need to be starting to do Wikipedia better than Wikipedia, in a more comprehensive way than Wikipedia does it. And as well, I think the value of learning at universities is this right here. There is a conversation with real people in a real room discussing ideas, and I think that will always be important to human beings, regardless of how good Skype gets. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that we were talking about the importance of a renaissance, for lack of a better term, education, and going back to a Renaissance education, part of their education would have been sciences, not just English, but they would have been schooled in mathematics, physics, and biology. Why have we stopped that now? Why is it that you go into university and you study arts or you study sciences? There is an arts and science department, but there needs to be more interdisciplinary programs between the two faculties.
No, it's interesting. I mean, sort of the creeping specialization which has taken place even in the high school system now, I think has been something that sort of often forces people to make decisions too early, but it was also created some of the stereotypes that we were talking about earlier, when in fact there's similarities between the situations.
I was just going to quickly say that math used to be an art, and we should just take it back. We should.
Good idea. We'll come over and play.
Well, but I mean, I think it's an interesting idea that M got tacked on to the end of the stem, right? that somehow I have a good friend who's a pure mathematician, and he hates all things practical. These should be our well, and maybe this goes against the flood of the argument, but these should be our allies. And I think you're right to suggest that the divisions we've set up are artificial, and ones certainly that have no historical grounding.
Certainly, I think as minority raised, they're facing many of the same pressures that we are today, and what they're doing is too abstract and idealistic and not grounded in the real world.
I think a common thing we've been discussing is not only are humanities valuable and do they matter, are they important? You were saying everyone kind of agrees, but the question is who should study humanities in a university setting? And that goes along with the Wikipedia comment. And I think that if we don't know the answer to this question, it's hard to make an argument for why people should be studying. In grade 12, my top subjects were chemistry and English, and I got near 100 in both of them. But at that time, I guess maybe I hadn't had enough life experience or whatever. I thought, hey, I'll be a pediatrician because why not? And I'm good at it, and sure, I'll get in. And I did that, and I did study science for 2 years, and I did well. I could be in med school right now, but somewhere along the line, I saw the value in studying Milton. And I think either we need to train or teach people or teach students to be, or to have some sort of rubric to give to students, say, who should be studying humanities. And if we think it's everyone, yeah, everyone should on their own time study humanities. That gives us that has different implications for how we should argue for the value of humanities. Mm-hmm. If it's only people who get 95 and above on the provincial English tests, that's a different answer too. So I think maybe amongst ourselves we're disagreeing with who should be studying the humanities.
Yeah, I think maybe we should reach out to high schools and to younger education to kind of build a stronger base in the humanities because it's really lacking. And attached to my previous one about privilege is that it's really sad because I think it's especially lacking in lower class schools and like lower class public education where there's much more of an emphasis on technical education. And especially, and even in like middle class public schools. And then in private schools, you have more focus on good humanities education. But there's less and less of that in certain kinds of high schools. And it's really stratified in a way that makes it really hard for people to get to the humanities once again. So I think, it's interesting about that high schools really should be thinking more about these issues.
Because I think that, one of our points is not to try to go out and make converts and sort of get people, sort of ensnare people from med school and lure them over to humanities. But